So the 2024 college football season is right around the corner, and this year could be a major turning point in the history of the sport for a number of different reasons. The Pac-12 is sadly no more, the Big Ten officially spans from coast to coast, and the Big 12 adds 4 new schools in an effort to stay in front of the brutal race that is conference realignment. However, a lot of experts predict that the landscape is bound to change even more drastically in the future, so I wouldn't get too comfortable with this current setup. And in my opinion, the real story going into this year is that finally, after over a century of college football, the sport has instituted a 12-team playoff format to decide the #1 team in the country. Hopefully what this means is that no more undefeated teams will be left out of a shot for a national title, or even having to resort to split champions, which has happened 16 times over the years. Now, will it be perfect? No. Will there be controversy? Yeah, I mean, would it be college football without it? For better or worse, this sport has always been unique and marched to the beat of its own drum. But some of you may be wondering what took so long. Why does every other major sport in the country have some kind of playoff format to determine its champion, including Division II college football? Why has it taken over a century for this sport to get a multi-round playoff system? And how did we finally arrive here? Well, to find the answer, we're gonna have to go back quite a ways, so let's take a look. So the first postseason game was actually played back in 1902. It was titled the Tournament East vs. West football game, and it was founded as part of a larger Tournament of Roses, which was a New Year's Day festival in Pasadena, California. And as the name suggests, it was a game designed to pit the best team in the West versus the best team in the East. And the proceeds from the ticket sales were meant to raise money for the annual Rose Parade. However, that first meeting didn't quite go as planned, as Michigan beat Stanford 49-0, forcing Stanford to quit in the third quarter. And it was actually such a bad loss that officials from the Tournament of Roses decided to scrap the game altogether and replaced it with chariot races, ostrich races, in order to raise more money. And it wouldn't be until 1916 when Washington played Brown and the annual tradition kicked off from there. And it was in 1947 when the Big Ten and the modern-day Pac-12 agreed to send both of their champions to the Rose Bowl every year. And over the years, other cities throughout the country noticed the economic benefits of having regional festivals like the Tournament of Roses and decided to develop their own festivals featuring major college football matchups. Thus, the Sugar Bowl, the Cotton Bowl, the Orange Bowl, and others were formed. And like the Rose Bowl, these bowl games had agreements with the regional conferences to host their champions every year on New Year's Day. And back in those days, after all of the bowls were completed, the voters would come together and decide a national champion. And I'm sure many of us can see where this goes wrong. Due to the strict bowl tie-in obligations, it didn't always guarantee that the top 2 teams played each other at the end of the year. And throughout this time, naming split champions was fairly common, happening a total of 10 times over the course of about 50 years. And it seems that not a whole lot was done about it until one team came along in the 80s that broke the whole system wide open. And that team was the now infamous 1984 BYU Cougars. And BYU started out the 1984 season completely off the national radar. I mean, sure, they were on a run of 8 straight WAC championships and an 11-game winning streak dating back to week 1 of the year prior, but they did lose their star quarterback Steve Young and some other key contributors from that 1983 team, so many considered 1984 to be a rebuilding year for Lavelle Edwards and the BYU Cougars. But after upsetting number 3 Pitt in the first game of the year, suddenly the schedule opened up and it looked pretty favorable for them to run the table and join the national championship conversation at the end of the year. However, it wouldn't come without some lucky breaks, especially when Oklahoma handed then #1 Nebraska their second loss of the season, propelling Oklahoma to #2 and dropping Nebraska pretty much out of the national championship conversation. #2 at the time, South Carolina, got blown out by a pretty bad Navy team, thus ending their shots at a national championship. #3 in the country, Florida, was on probation and thus ineligible for any kind of postseason play. #4, Washington, had 1 loss on the season to USC, so they were in the conversation for the championship, but in no ways the favorite to be #1. suddenly BYU found themselves ranked number 1 in the country to end the regular season. But as I mentioned before, the bowl tie-in obligations were strictly enforced back in these days. Even though BYU was ranked number 1 in the country, they were forced to play in the Holiday Bowl. And rumors had it that the Holiday Bowl was really trying to get Washington to come play against BYU and settle things on the field. But understandably, they chose to go to the Orange Bowl and play number 2 Oklahoma in a more prestigious and more lucrative bowl game. And there's a lot of debate nowadays about Washington's decision. I mean, they were kind of in a catch-22. They could go to the Orange Bowl and prove themselves the champion against the number 2 team in the country, Oklahoma, which in hindsight didn't end up working out. Or they could go to the Holiday Bowl, play BYU, settle things on the field, but risk Oklahoma winning the Orange Bowl and being declared the national champions regardless. So it ended up being number 2 Oklahoma versus number 4 Washington in the Orange Bowl, and a lot of the national media was considering this to be the unofficial national championship, while BYU was left with playing a mediocre Michigan team in the Holiday Bowl. Well, sure enough, BYU beat that 6-6 Michigan team, overcoming 7 turnovers, and BYU narrowly edged out Washington in the final rankings to be crowned the 1984 national champions. And a lot of people consider this to be the catalyst for the strength of schedule debate that really heated up after this season and was a major domino to fall in the revamping of the college football postseason altogether. Fast forward to 1995, and in an effort to pin the 2 best teams in the country against each other at the end of the year, the Bowl Alliance was formed. One bowl game every year would feature the 2 top-ranked teams in the country, regardless of bowl affiliation. Well, all of them except for the Rose Bowl. But it's just one bowl game, I'm sure it won't have any issues going forward.
You sure about that?
Well, sure enough, 2 years later, an undefeated Michigan team was forced to play a number 8 Washington State in the Rose Bowl, while number 2 Nebraska and number 3 Tennessee played each other in the Orange Bowl. Of course, both Michigan and Nebraska won. Michigan was voted champs in the AP poll, and Nebraska was voted champs in the coaches poll. Yet again, 2 teams with legit claims to the title, and thus a split champion was named. And sadly, it doesn't end there. The year after, in 1998, the Rose Bowl finally agreed to join the Bowl Alliance, thus the BCS or Bowl Championship Series was formed. Finally, we've arrived, all the bowl games are on board, and we can name one true champion every year. Actually, far from it. 2003, more debate was raised. So the top teams in question were USC, LSU, and Oklahoma. Oklahoma loses to Kansas State in the Big 12 title game, dropping from number 1 to number 3. USC finishes the year ranked number 1 in the AP poll and the coaches poll, with LSU ranked number 2. However, one of USC's wins was against Hawaii. So why does that matter? Well, Hawaii lost their last game to Boise State. This hurt USC's strength of schedule just enough that the computer rankings that decide the BCS championship game put them behind LSU and Oklahoma to end the year, leaving the number 1 ranked team in the country out of the national championship game. LSU would go on to beat Oklahoma and claim the BCS championship, while USC would beat number 4 Michigan in the Rose Bowl, which shouldn't technically have mattered because the voters were obligated to vote for the BCS champion, which was LSU, but a few coaches refused and voted for USC, thus causing another split champion to be named. And really, it just gets a whole lot more messy from here in what I call the BCS Buster era. Pretty much since the 1984 BYU Cougars were able to steal a national championship, the conversation around strength of schedule really tightened up and made it nearly impossible for any non-Power 5 team to make it into the championship game. In 2004, Utah, Boise State, and even Auburn were denied a spot in the national championship due to strength of schedule. In 2006, Boise State beat Oklahoma in that classic Fiesta Bowl and finished as the only undefeated team that season, but 8th in the final rankings. In 2008, an undefeated Utah team beat Alabama in the Sugar Bowl. An undefeated Boise State team was left out of a New Year's Six Bowl altogether. Utah finished that season as the only undefeated team, but ranked number 2. And again in 2010, an undefeated TCU team beat Wisconsin in the Fiesta Bowl and finished the season ranked 2. too. And the sentiment around who should be included in the BCS championship game really gets summed up in this quote from then Ohio State President E. Gordon Lee. He says, "I don't know, having been both a Southeastern Conference president and a Big Ten president, that's like murderer's row every week for these schools. We do not play the little sisters of the poor, we play very fine schools on any given day." The irony here is that TCU went on to beat Wisconsin, who did in fact beat Ohio State that year. So which team was truly the little sisters of the poor that year? And it wasn't until 2014 that some of these postseason issues were finally addressed. College football gets its first iteration of a playoff. I mean, sure, it was only 4 teams and it was decided by a subjective selection committee in some boardroom somewhere, but at least it was something. And for the most part, things went on for the next few years without major controversy. We still had G5 schools getting snubbed after going undefeated, but that's just par for the course at this point. And it wasn't until last year when the stunning and unprecedented decision to leave a undefeated P5 champion out of the playoff in favor of a one-loss P5 champion. I can somewhat understand the argument that Florida State's starting quarterback got hurt late in the year and they were a different team after that, but they still won the games to deserve a shot. There's just something that rubs me the wrong way about a committee in a boardroom deciding whether a team that went undefeated deserves a shot at a national championship over a team that's lost a game. And to the people that argue, well, we don't want to see blowouts in the playoffs.
Oh, that's not so much. So?
Which brings us to today, 2024. After over a century of wandering in the wilderness of failed postseason formats, subjective selection committees, split champions, and endless controversy, college football finally has a 12-team playoff that somewhat resembles every other major sport in America. Now, is there still going to be debate and controversy over which team kind of squeaks in at the end? Yes. Is the SEC still going to get the benefit of the doubt every single year? Yes, of course. But I truly believe that this format all but guarantees that the teams that earn the right will get to settle things on the field. I'm extremely excited to see how this first postseason plays out. I think this year should really be celebrated as the year college football got it right and that champions were decided on the field and not in conference rooms. I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.